Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. You are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. And today we're talking about the Week 16 keys to victory and some key matchups for the Falcons in this Detroit Lions game, as well as answering a couple of your listener questions talking about the league's regression towards running the football or the Falcons' regression in the 2022 upcoming season.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. You know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at falcfans, writing occasional weekly content over at the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons, thefalcoholic.com, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL. On Location is the only place to score a once-in-a-lifetime Super Bowl ticket and experience package. Just visit onlocationexp.com/SB56 for more information or search Super Bowl On Location. So today's episode, we're going to be talking keys to victory, key matchups for this upcoming Week 16 game against the Falcons and Lions. We'll also be answering a couple of listener questions. One is about whether or not we're going to see NFL teams around the league running the football more in the future. And then we'll answer another question about the potential regression that the Falcons may experience with a much harder schedule in 2022. For those of you tuning into the video version of the podcast, which is, of course, available on the Locked On Falcons YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to that page. You can see me in my festive holiday Christmas gear. I got the Santa hat on. I got the red and green lights going. I know my skin tone doesn't necessarily make different colored lights pop necessarily, but go check us out if you're only listening to the audio version, so you can get that fun festive feeling. Although I guess we're not going to be too fun and festive. Like, we know we are fun and festive on this podcast, but we'll talk a little bit about the Falcons potential keys to victory this upcoming week. I do expect the Falcons to win. I'll give you my final score in a second, but I think it's going to require the Falcons to take care of business. Looking at the Falcons defense when they face the Detroit Lions offense, I think similar to what we saw in that Week 9 game against the Saints, given that the Lions are likely to have a backup quarterback. More on that later. The focus is going to be on stopping the run. Or at least I don't know if we're going to see more of Craig Reynolds or if Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift are going to be back in the mix this week. But I think obviously the Lions, given the expectation that Jared Goff, due to COVID, will miss this weekend's matchup, that the Lions will be focusing on running the football. And so it starts with the Falcons having to stop the run there. And then if they can do that, that's going to get whoever the quarterback is into unmanageable situations. And then it's going to be important for the Falcons to cover the Lions' top pass catcher, which is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He spends the bulk of his snaps in the slot, and that's where the Falcons have their biggest weakness in the secondary currently, at that slot position. And we'll probably see a rotation of Richie Grant, Darren Hall, and potentially Sean Williams as well, who's just brought up from the practice squad this week, at least for the remainder of the season, for the foreseeable future. And we'll see which one of those guys gets more opportunities. Richie Grant did not play a lot against the 49ers. I think a lot of that was owed to the fact that, first of all, the 49ers didn't allow the Falcons to play a ton of nickel in this game, and also Richie Grant made a number, or missed a number of tackles early in the game, and that led to them probably pulling the hook on him a little bit early. So we'll see if he bounces back this week. He's probably, him or Hall, are probably our best options there against Amon-Ra St. Brown. Switching to the other side of the ball with the Falcons offense going into the Detroit Lions defense, I think the big key matchup is going to be in the trenches between Jake Matthews and Charles Harris. Harris spends the bulk of his snaps rushing from the right side of the D-line, which is the left side of the offensive line. Maybe the Lions switch things up and try to give him a more favorable matchup against Caleb McGarry this week. But by and large, I think it's like 80-something% of his snaps come from that right side of defensive line. So it's going to be him against Jake. And, Harris, I've seen, again, I haven't watched a ton of Lions this year, but Harris likes to use that bull rush from time to time, and that's usually Jake's biggest weakness. So hopefully Jake can take care of business there. And if he does, I think that will give Matt Ryan more than enough time, because I don't think there's enough other capable Lions pass rushers that should take over this game in a major way. So the Falcons pass protection should hold up much better this week than they did in previous weeks if they can keep Charles Harris blocked, and that should give Matt Ryan plenty of time to be able to pick apart this Lions defense. And, we might see a lot more of Cordero Patterson, Mike Davis involved in the running game and the passing game, because the Lions rank dead last according to Football Outsiders DVOA metric when it comes to passes thrown to the running back position. So those guys should have some opportunities underneath. And the Lions are also pretty bad when it comes to run defense, according to DVOA, with the 29th ranked run defense, which is actually lower than the Falcons' 26th ranked run defense. So we know the Falcons, outside of maybe like 3 games, have not done a good job stopping the run this year. So the Lions seemingly have done a worse job. And so I think ultimately who decides, I think it's a favorable matchup for the Falcons, but the deciding factor in this game is, of course, going to be turnovers, right? And, I think that favors the Falcons potentially, just because the Lions, when they do get in those passing situations, if Jared Goff is not in this game, will have potentially a quarterback prone to turning the ball over, whether that's Tim Boyle or David Blau. Boyle has 2 interceptions and 23 pass attempts this season, which is almost as bad as Josh Rosen. So he's turnover prone. And Blau, his career interception rate is 3.8%. And interception rate, of course, is factoring interceptions per attempt. And for the sake of comparison, Jameis Winston's career interception rate is 3.3%. And Justin Fields, who's the worst in the NFL this year among the qualifying starters, has an interception rate of 3.7%. So both of these guys seem to be very prone to throwing picks when they get into the lineup. So again, that's why the key is to stop the run and force these guys to throw, because then the Falcons should be able to take advantage of those opportunities with some plays on the back end. So I do predict the win here. My final score prediction, I'm going with like 24-19. And so I think we'll probably see a similar game like we saw in that Saints game earlier this season, where the Falcons get off to a good start and get an early lead. And, as usual, probably let the Lions back into it a little bit too much towards the end. Things get a little bit nervous, and we start to sweat a little bit in that fourth quarter, but the Falcons find a way to hold on to it. And hopefully it won't come down to the final play like it has in previous Falcons-Lions matchups over the last couple of years. But we'll just sort of have to see how that goes. But I think this is a golden opportunity for the Falcons to get their 7th win of the season. And, I've been predicting at least 7 wins all year long. And so I don't see any reason to change, because I think this is a pretty favorable matchup for the Falcons. So that's where we'll leave the sort of keys to victory, and we'll get into the Q&A portion of today's Christmas Eve holiday festive show by talking about whether or not the league is going to be moving towards more running the football in the future. And we'll talk more about whether the Falcons are going to be one of the teams moving in that direction moving forward. But before we get there, guys, it is the holiday season. And of course, we're getting towards the end of the year and the beginning of a new year, where everybody's all about that, New Year's resolution to eat healthier and lose more weight. And you can do that by checking out the best tasting protein bar on the market. That is, of course, Built Bars. Built Bars are rich with decadent flavor. They're covered in chocolate. They taste just like a candy bar, even better than a candy bar, but they're healthy too. They're low in sugar, carbs, and calories, and fat, and high in protein and fiber. You get the best of both worlds, both delicious and healthy. You get limited time holiday themed flavors like candy cane brownie bite, gingerbread eggnog. You get other limited time flavors like ruby chocolate, lemon dip cheesecake, coconut brownie chunk, which was voted the best flavor for Built Bar back in March in their March Madness tournament. Or you can get tried and trues like coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, salted caramel, double chocolate, and many, many more. Of course, pick your favorite flavor or build your own box by heading to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 when you do, for 15% off your first order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So this is also the time of year where everybody's nervous about their fantasy football lineups. And some of you, like me, have probably been knocked out of the fantasy playoffs. Some of you didn't even make the fantasy playoffs. And that's because playing daily fantasy sports is a losing proposition. No one likes losing. Everybody likes winning. And that's where Stat Hero comes in with the first of its kind daily fantasy sports platform. where it's you versus the house in a head-to-head fantasy matchup, winner take all. And this never before seen fantasy sports innovation clocks you better odds, 4 times better than traditional platforms, because Stat Hero is basically showing you their lineups before you play, and you basically can handpick the team that you want to face one-on-one. If you think you can beat that team versus that team, then play the team that you think you can beat. That's what makes Stat Hero great. You're in control of your fate. You're in control of the stakes. You decide how much you're willing to play for, and Stat Hero has no choice but to take it, because they're daring you to beat them. Sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon. And when you do, use the promo code LOCKEDON and you'll get a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon. Promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% match. stathero.com/lockedon. Promo code LOCKEDON. Terms and conditions apply. So our first listener question comes from Joe Bear at Joe Bear 74 on Twitter. He asks, do you think the league will trend back towards the run in the next couple of years? And Joe asked this question in relation to a tweet I sent out promoting the Athletic Football Show, where they did a recent episode, I believe on Wednesday, where Robert Mays, the host, and Mitchell Schwartz, the former Kansas City Chiefs offensive tackle, talked about the value of running the football in today's NFL. And I think it's an excellent listen to get their insights into that. But to answer Joe's question, no, I don't really think the league is going to trend towards running the football, but I do think there are going to be teams that will benefit from zigging while the rest of the league zags. And we've seen that play out several times over the last decade. You can go back to those Harbaugh-led 49ers teams earlier this decade. You can go back to the 2019 season, where you had several teams like the Titans and the Ravens, the Seahawks, the 49ers, make pretty decent runs in the postseason with sort of run first offenses. You're potentially going to see teams like the Colts this upcoming season do that. The Browns are another team that's had a lot of success the last couple of years with a run force offense. And I think the key, really is about running the football at a high level. When it comes to the Falcons specifically, I think Arthur Smith is going to be building. He wants to have that type of team. And one of the things that Mitchell Schwartz talked a lot about in that athletic football episode was the physicality that bringing the run football and imposing your will, and that sort of tried and true method of that physical element of the football game that still exists and is still is important to the game. That's what the run game brings. And so even if the data and the analytics are saying that passing the ball is a much more efficient option, in the long run, there's still a lot of value inherently to running the football. And I think Arthur Smith wants to bring that mentality. And it makes sense to me that he wants to bring that mentality, not simply because, running the football doesn't matter, or any of these sort of conversations that we like to have, but you're looking at an aging Matt Ryan. And whether we're talking about Matt Ryan or we're talking about the quarterback that eventually replaces Matt Ryan, there's going to be value to running the football, because I think quarterbacks are much like people, where it's funny, where you talk about when you're a baby when you're born, and then you grow up, and then as you age, you sort of revert back to being a baby the older you get. As people say, and quarterbacks are kind of the same way, where it's like when you first come into the league, you really need your supporting cast to be strong to have success. And then as you reach your peak in your late 20s or early 30s as a quarterback, then you can kind of be this quarterback that can win games throwing the ball 50 times or whatever the case may be. But then as you get into your late 30s and now into your 40s, you kind of need that supporting cast around you. We saw that with Drew Brees. We see that with Tom Brady. Like the Patriots, drafted a running back in the first round a couple of years ago with Sony Michel, something that they, would have never done in previous years, in large part due to wanting to take pressure off of Tom Brady to have to throw the win games and whatnot. So, it's one of those things where I think that's a smart strategy for the Falcons. The only beef I have with running the football is not some sort of inherent beef about, running the football is stupid. I just don't like teams that do things that don't work for them. And for most of this season, the running game has not worked for the Falcons. Now it's been much better over the last month than it was prior to that. And so my biggest beef with the running game prior to that was it just wasn't working. I have a beef with teams doing things that don't work. But if they can get this running game to work, then I have no problem with this team running the football moving forward, whether that's with Matt Ryan or whatever the case may be. And so this gets back to the point I've made several times in the podcast, and we won't spend a ton of time talking about it. But, with Matt Ryan getting up there in age and the Falcons needing to invest more resources into building that run game, building that supporting cast around him. This is going to be the dilemma that the Falcons are going to have to deal with, because all the resources that they put around Matt Ryan moving forward are resources that are not going to go toward, or at least around Matt Ryan in the offense. It's not going to be resources that don't go to the defense. And that's been the dilemma that the Falcons have been dealing with for the better part of 14 years now, and will continue to deal with moving forward with Matt Ryan. And it only gets exasperated going back to the earlier point that the older Matt Ryan gets. And so, again, that's not meant to be a knock on Matt Ryan. Too often, these conversations surrounding team building and Matt Ryan specifically building the right team around Matt Ryan, people get too biased by their, the Civil War and their pro or anti Matt Ryan bias or whatever, because it's not really a judgment. This would still be the case whether it was Matt Ryan, Justin Fields, or any other quarterback, David Blau being the Falcons quarterback. We'd still be having these same conversations. It just gets back to the concern, and it goes back to something that Jeff Schultz of The Athletic said on the podcast, is like, if you are paying Matt Ryan all these resources, are those resources that you could be using to build up a better supporting cast? And ultimately, the decision to keep Matt Ryan is not only tied to the team success, and we'll get more into that on the latter part of today's episode when we answer a listener question related to that, but also whether or not he's an obstacle to building up a better roster. And it's not to sit here and say it's this one-to-one correspondence that some people would like to portray, this sort of simple black and white binary that some people like to portray it as, oh, we pay Matt Ryan, that means the rest of the team is bad. Like, even if you do get rid of Matt Ryan, you free up all that cap space to now be used to spend on free agents, you still got to sign the right guys. And if you're going out there and spending money on the James Carpenters, the Jamon Browns, and the who's a bad free agent, Mike Davis, I guess, if you want to call him that, this year, that's still not going to help you. Just because you have more money doesn't mean that your team's going to be better. And, Matt Ryan's contract had nothing to do with the Falcons whiffing on draft picks. If you want to call players like Jalen Mayfield, Caleb McGarry, Vic Beasley, or whoever else you want to call Tack McKinley whiffs over the years that you guys have, called those various players, like, Matt Ryan's contract had nothing to do with that. So it's not sort of this simple, like, oh, we get rid of Matt Ryan and we can build up a successful team, and it's also not as easy as people want to sit here and say that Matt Ryan's contract has nothing to do with those things. They're all interwoven and interrelated, and these are going to be issues and topics that we're going to continue to discuss on this podcast. So if you can't talk about those things or hear someone talk about those things without feeling some type of way that my secret agenda is to tell people that Matt Ryan's bad or whatever the case may be, or you interpret all that as hating on Matt Ryan, or you want to think, oh, Aaron's one of us and let's get in the comments and bag Matt Ryan and trash him and act like all the Falcons problems stem from that. That's not how it works. It's not a domino effect, guys. And this is the thing I continue to stress on this podcast, that a lot of people think it's just like, oh, you knock down this one domino, whether we're talking about getting rid of Matt Ryan, whether we're talking about keeping Matt Ryan, whether it's drafting this player, hiring this coach, or whatever. You knock down this one domino and all the other dominoes fall. You knock down one domino at a time. You fix one problem at a time. And so you have to address each problem at a time, and it's not this sort of trickle down effect that I think a lot of people have. And that's what we get into the whole scapegoat versus savior conversation, is that you guys want to sit here and act like, oh, we'll scapegoat this one guy, and if we fire this guy, we trade this guy, all of our problems go away. And if we hire this guy, if we draft this guy, then all of our problems go away. And it's like, you just solved one problem. That's all you do. If you hit on the pick or you hit on the hire or whatever the case may be, you've just solved one problem. You still have a dozen more to deal with. So that's the thing I continue to stress on this podcast, and will continue to stress, eternally on this podcast. So, obviously there's so much more we can unpack on this issue, and there's so much more we can say about this. But to answer your question, Joe, no, I don't think that the league is going to overall trend towards run. I think it's still too much value in throwing the football overall, but there will be teams that will be successful zigging when other teams zag, and maybe the Falcons one day, not this year, but maybe next year or the year after, will be one of those teams. And speaking of next year or the year after, let's talk a little bit more about that as we answer a listener's question about the potential regression the Falcons are going to have next year, given the much harder schedule. But before we get into all of that, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, I always have recommendations for what your second and listen should be. And of course, why not check out the Locked On Bulls? I'm sorry, Locked On Hawks. Why did I say Locked On Bulls? Locked On Bulldogs. I'm sorry, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks, and Locked On Braves podcast. Of course, Locked On Braves got you covered for all the things going on with my cousin Freddie. Locked On Hawks, I don't even know what's going on in the NBA right now, but Locked On Hawks has you covered in terms of the impact of COVID and all these various things, whether or not you're going to see the Hawks this weekend in MSG or whatever the case may be. Keep track of that on Locked On Hawks. It's not here for me to cover. And of course, Locked On Bulldogs is going to get you geared up for a big playoff game for the University of Georgia, where they're on the road to a national title. And speaking on teams being on the road to a national title, the best place to take advantage on whether your team is on that road is, of course, Bet Online. They have you covered all season long, whether we're talking about the regular season, but the now playoffs for not only college football, but the NFL. Bet Online is the number one spot, but it's not just football that Bet Online has you covered for. They got you covered for the NBA, NHL, boxing, UFC, all the way to your favorite Vegas casino games. Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. And of course, this weekend, the Falcons and Lions are facing each other. There's a 5.5 point spread in the favor of the Falcons. 24-19 was my earlier prediction. That means I don't think the Falcons are going to cover, but that's very close. And you guys know that I've been predicting the Falcons to not cover games, and they always seem to cover. And when I predict the Falcons, I think they will cover, they never seem to cover. So take my advice or ignore my advice by heading over to betonline.ag. And when you do, make sure you sign up with the promo code Locked On, and you'll get a 50% welcome bonus. That means that if you deposit $200, you get $100 in free money to play with that you can use for or against the Falcons. And of course, don't wait and take advantage of that offer by heading to Bet Online, where the game starts. So our last question comes from Mantis Toboggan MD at Sebastian's Dad 19 on Twitter. He asks, seems like the 2022 schedule gets a lot harder. Knowing what we know right now, what bold prediction would you or could you make about next season's outcome, and what regression would have to happen for you to start thinking the Falcons team needs to hit restart? So yes, the Falcons 2022 schedule is a lot harder. What's funny is it's very similar to what the current Lions schedule is, which is currently the second hardest schedule in the NFL behind the Chiefs. And the Lions face, like the Falcons will in 2022, the AFC North and the NFC West. Obviously, the Falcons are facing the NFC South instead of the NFC North, and which, based off of current records, the NFC South is the better of those divisions. So presumably it could even be harder. The 17th game is an AFC West opponent, which, based off of current standings and projected standings, will either be probably the Raiders or the Broncos. Again, we're expecting the Falcons to finish in third place this year, I think, right now, especially if they can win this weekend against the Lions. And it looks like Carolina will probably finish in fourth just because they have Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and then Tampa Bay. So it's going to be hard for them to get another win the rest of the season. And so they will need at least two wins to finish in third place in those final three if the Falcons take care of business this weekend. The Raiders and Broncos are playing this weekend, so whoever wins that game will probably be the front runner for that third place squad. And then assuming the Falcons get third place, then they'll also be facing potentially the Bears and Washington next year as well to round out their schedule. And, bold predictions, it'll be, I'm not going to make a prediction this far ahead, but it'll certainly be an interesting 2 weeks on Twitter when the Falcons face the Bears and Justin Fields is the quarterback there for Falcon fans and their quote unquote loyalties or whatever you want to call it. The week leading up to that game and potentially the week after that game, especially if the Falcons manage to lose that game, and probably even if the Falcons win that game, it's going to be an interesting place on Falcons Twitter and other social media platforms for that 2 week period. So that will be something to keep an eye on for next year. But I think the regression is a real thing. You're looking at the expected win totals of the Falcons, and I joked earlier this month on Twitter that this year the Falcons are probably going to win 7 games and have an expected win total of 4. Last year they won 4 games and had an expected win total of 7. And what that expected win total is based off of point differential, how many points you score, how many points you give up, and basically just the idea of that, on average, based off of that point differential, your team would win this many games and whatnot. And so last year the Falcons obviously underachieved. This year they're overachieving that expected win total based off of point differential, and a lot of that is due to their record in one-score games. Last year it was a very bad record. This year it's a very good record, and that tends to regress year to year. Over time, that's going to average out to you basically being 500 in general across those one score games. We saw the Browns last year very good. I think they were like 9-1 in one score games, something ridiculous last year. And then we've seen them kind of regress in that regard. I don't know what their record is, but obviously they're not having as good a year as they seemingly did a year ago. And so, the Falcons regress to the mean, which is mean, from a year ago where they got better in those one score games. They'll probably regress backwards. And you've heard me mention before on the podcast that some of that may be owed to the fact that they're facing the quality of quarterback that they're facing, right? That a year ago in a lot of those one-score games, they were facing high-level quarterbacks like Matt Stafford and Patrick Mahomes, and this year they're facing more of the Trevor Lawrences, the Trevor Simeons, and potentially the David Blows or Tim Boyles, and that's allowing them to be a little bit better in those one-score games and be better getting those late-game stops and whatnot. And next year, going up against that schedule, we don't know exactly who's going to be a quarterback for several of these teams. Seattle, Pittsburgh, some of those teams, Cleveland's in flux, etc. But we'll just sort of, it looks like they'll face much tougher competition from the quarterback standpoint next year. So that may have an impact on those one score football games. But I think in terms of regression to quote unquote hit that restart button, I think, if they wind up regressing to 5 or 6 wins, there's going to be a lot more pressure on this team to hit the quote unquote restart button. And mainly that restart button is at the quarterback position, because typically, 5 or 6 win teams wind up picking in the top 10 or so picks. And we talked about this back in the spring when we had the Locked On Chargers host come on the show and talk about that decision to pass on a quarterback back in the 2017 draft when they had Phillip Rivers and the brand new head coach and Anthony Lynn, and they had an opportunity to take guys like Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Watson to groom behind Phillip Rivers for the foreseeable future, and they wound up taking Mike Williams. Then they had some success, but then the minute they had another top 10 pick, in 2020, they wound up having to take that quarterback in Justin Herbert. And one wonders, obviously, Herbert looks like he's going to have a very bright future, and the battles between him and Mahomes are going to be great. But, in a world where the 2020s, where the Chiefs, win the division 7 times over the next 10 years and win 2 or 3 Super Bowls, and the Chargers win the division, 2 or so times and win 0 Super Bowls, as good as Justin Herbert may be, and he may wind up having a Hall of Fame career, despite that, they're going to look at that with regret, and they let a great quarterback go to their division rival. Obviously, the same dynamics don't necessarily exist for the Falcons with passing on Justin Fields and Mac Jones, although again they may feel that next year if the Bears wind up beating them. But it is one of those things where if the quarterback, if they don't land their Justin Herbert, they don't get as good a guy in potentially in that 2023 draft that they're picking in the top 10, that's going to be a problem. And you also factor in, and I know some people are like, well, if they're going to be potentially taking quarterback in 2023, why would they take a quarterback in 2022 like you've been predicting these last couple of weeks, Aaron? And I sit here and I say, well, what happens? And again, I don't know enough about the upcoming 2023 draft class. All I've heard is it's probably going to be better than this current upcoming draft class, but I don't know enough on, who's going to be the top guys or anything like that. But let's say the Falcons do win like 6 games and wind up picking like 8th in the 2023 draft class. And let's say there's like 3 really good quarterbacks in that draft, but let's say there are teams like the Giants and the Lions picking in the top 3 or 4 picks. And let's throw another team like the Texans into the conversation. And those teams are also quarterback needy, and there's a 3 quarterback draft, and those 3 quarterbacks go in those top 3 or 4 picks to those teams, and the Falcons are stuck at 8th, out of the mix. And sitting here, their only options are to basically trade away, multiple future first round picks, which is going to limit their ability to, surround that rookie with a strong supporting cast, or, to reach on the 4th best quarterback at pick overall 8 overall, or whatever the case may be. And so you don't want to necessarily put yourself in that position. And that's one of the benefits, one of multiple benefits of taking a quarterback this year, is it gives you some flexibility that if you secure your backup quarterback this upcoming season, it gives you some flexibility that your hand is not forced in that 2023 draft where you might be picking in the top 10 or whatever the case may be. And obviously the Falcons can avoid all this fate if they are successful. But, I just think, sitting here today, what we know right now, It doesn't look promising for the Falcons in 2022, but I don't want to paint this completely doom and gloom portrait. Like, let's have some festive talk and ways that the Falcons can navigate this. Like, I don't think the Falcons, contrary to popular opinion, I don't think the Falcons' talent level is as deficient as some would have you believe. I think if they can, upgrade at least one of their starting offensive line spots, namely the left guard position, with competent to good play from a starter, that will greatly enhance their offense. They get Calvin Ridley back, and Kyle Pitts makes a big jump in a year two. And Calvin Ridley looks more like 2020 Calvin Ridley than 2021 Calvin Ridley, where basically Arthur Smith figures out how to use him. And uses him more like Dirk Cutter. Again, it's incredible that we're saying that. Be more like Dirk Cutter. But if Arthur Smith can figure that out, then I think your offense is suddenly going to look much, much better in 2022. And then, the defense, you probably need like an 8 to 10 sack guy at that edge rusher position, assuming Grady Jarrett's back next year. If you can get another linebacker, if you can replace Deion Jones with a capable linebacker that's better fit in this DP scheme, which I don't think will be super hard, that helps your front seven. Obviously, you need a little bit more help beyond that. You need to bolster your depth and get more beef there so you can stop the run and whatnot. But, finding capable run defenders isn't hard in this league. And then you probably get one more playmaker in the secondary, whether that's an outside corner, whether that's a nickel corner, whether that's a safety. I feel like, your three big pieces, that offensive lineman, that pass rusher, and that secondary player away, and then a couple of mid-tier little pieces that you are away from being a team that can make a significant leap in 2022. And again, if you're in a situation where we're sitting here saying, that their floor, which, again, I don't know if this is accurate, but let's say their floor is like a 5 or 6 win team, given the toughness of their schedule. If you can add a couple of those pieces, and then you can get Arthur Smith's, play calling to be much improved in year two, and have that year two jump that a lot of people think he will have, similar to Kyle Shanahan. As I've explained previously on the podcast, I'm not expecting that, but if that does happen, then all of a sudden you go from like a 5 or 6 win team, even against this tough schedule, to a potentially 8 or 9 win team. And we're not having the same conversation about blowing this thing up. At that point in time, at the end of the 2022 season, we're talking about, okay, we just need to fix this. We need to tweak this. And all of a sudden we're a playoff team in 2023. And you're basically looking at an improvement against a much tougher schedule in 2022. Again, assuming that you win 7, maybe 8 games this year, if you can get to 8 or 9 games next year, rather than this massive regression. But it's going to take a lot of work for the Falcons to get there. I'm not trying to make it seem like it's an easy thing to do, but I don't think it's as sort of impossible a task to do, but it's going to take considerable effort and considerable execution on the part of the people that are the powers that be here in Atlanta. So I don't think it's as doom and gloom. I don't think the glass is as empty as maybe at times I may express it to be. It's not going to be easy, is the point I'm trying to make. And so the Falcons going to have to work hard, and there's going to be pressure on this regime to pull that off if they're capable of doing it, because otherwise we're going to be potentially hitting that restart button as early in 2023 at the quarterback position. And then you're at the mercy of hoping that, their ability to evaluate quarterbacks is actually good. And we don't really know that at this point in time. And you better hope that the quarterback class has enough capable players, and again, we don't really know that at that point in time. So it's too many unknowns. And as a person that believes it when I see it, and tendency to be that glass half empty type of person, it's hard for me to be overly optimistic that it's all going to work out in the Falcons' favor. But we'll just sort of have to see how it all plays out, guys. So that will do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. I hope that answers your questions. Matthew, aka Mantis Toboggan, MD, aka Sebastian's Dad 19. And I hope, Joe, your question was answered as well. If you want to provide your feedback or have your questions answered on the podcast, of course, you can hit me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And of course, Locked On Falcons free, available on a variety of podcast platforms. So is Locked On Bets, where handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you his daily picks, his blowout specials, and his lock of the day every single day on the Locked On Bets podcast to put that money in your pocket as you get geared up for this holiday season, for the upcoming calendar year, so you can stuff that wallet and spend your money in 2022 as you see fit. So, guys, I hope you have a Merry Christmas. Hope you have a happy holidays. We'll be back, of course, on Sunday to give you the reaction to whatever we see in this Week 16 matchup and whether Charles Harris cooks Jake Matthews, whether or not Richie Grant shuts down Amon-Ra St. Brown, and whether or not Tim Boyle throws 2 interceptions or whatever the case happens in this Week 16 matchup between the Falcons and Lions. And of course, we got more great content coming for you next week as well. Maybe some potential best of the year. And that's a great opportunity for you guys to provide your feedback on some of the content you want to close out this 2021 calendar year as we work towards the Falcons closing out their 2021 regular season. But guys, appreciate it. Hope you have a great holiday weekend. If you're traveling, I hope you stay safe and all that various stuff. And, eat some year-old fruitcake on me this weekend or whatever the case may be.